For every man who carried something beautiful in silence for too long. Act 1. The bar at the end of Miller Road. The neon sign above Haggerty's Tavern had been broken for 11 years. Thomas Calloway knew this because he had been the one who broke it. Not intentionally, not with malice, but with the particular carelessness of a 22-year-old who had been drinking since noon and thought that climbing the drainage pipe on the east wall of the building to impress a boy would end in anything other than catastrophe. The sign had read, "Haggerty's Open" in red and white. After that August evening, it read, "Haggerty's ON," the P, and the space between lost to the gravel lot below. He had not been back since. That was 15 years ago. He was 37 now, which was a fact that still surprised him every morning when he looked in the mirror above the bathroom sink in his apartment in Columbus. 37. A man who wore reading glasses when he checked the news in the morning. A man who kept a small herb garden on the windowsill and watered it without irony. A man whose college roommate had called him last month to announce the arrival of a third child. And Thomas had sent a gift card and meant it warmly and felt nothing strange about either of those things. A man finally, not a boy anymore. He sat in the parking lot of Haggerty's Tavern in Millhaven, Ohio, at 8:14 on a Friday evening in October, with the engine of his rented Civic still running, and he watched his breath fog the windshield in small, uncertain clouds. He had come back for his father's retirement party, which had been held earlier that afternoon at the Elks Lodge on Route 9. His father had worked 31 years at the Millhaven Water Authority, and the turnout had been good. Better than good, actually. And there had been a sheet cake with blue frosting and a handshake from the county commissioner and a small plaque with his father's name on it, Richard Calloway, in raised brass letters. Thomas had stood at the back of the room with a cup of weak coffee and watched his father receive all of this with the mild embarrassment of a man who never quite believed he deserved it. He had planned to leave right after. Dinner with his parents, drive to Columbus in the morning. Then his mother had said, almost offhandedly, the way she said things she had been rehearsing for days, "Jesse Morrow is back in town." Thomas had set down his coffee cup very carefully on the folding table beside him. "Jesse's been back about 3 months now," his mother continued, arranging things on the dessert table that did not need arranging. "His grandmother passed. You remember Ellie Morrow? She made that wonderful peanut brittle? And he came back to settle things with the house. He's been staying. Nobody's quite sure if he means to stay, but there he is. Where is he staying?" His mother had looked at him then, directly, with an expression he could not entirely read. "He's been tending bar at Haggerty's while Dale Haggerty recovers from his knee surgery. Fills in some evenings." Thomas had driven to the Elks Lodge parking lot and sat in the car for 20 minutes. Then he drove to his parents' house and sat in their driveway for 15. Then he drove to Haggerty's and sat in this parking lot and watched his breath fog the windshield and told himself 3 times that he would leave, and then did not leave. Millhaven, Ohio. Population 4,200, give or take, depending on who had left for college and not come back, and who had returned for reasons that filled you with either tenderness or warning. A town built along the curve of the Millhaven River, which was not particularly impressive as rivers went, but which had the decency to freeze solid every January and stay frozen until March, long enough that the boys of the town, and it was always the boys, specifically, would carry their ice skates to the flat bend below the water tower and spend Saturdays in a kind of uncomplicated joy that Thomas had never found anywhere else in his adult life. He and Jesse had skated there every winter from the age of 7 until the age of 14, when everything changed. The bar looked the same. That was the first thing you noticed, returning to a place after a long absence. How it refused to accommodate your growth. Haggerty's was a long, low building of dark brick. The kind of place that had been a hardware store in another life, and still seemed faintly aware of it. The ceilings high and utilitarian. The bar itself a long slab of oak that had been there since Thomas's grandfather had bellied up to it in 1962. The windows were small and set high in the walls, which was deliberate. Dale Haggerty's father, who had opened the bar in 1958, had held the firm belief that a man should not be able to see out of a bar while he was drinking. It encouraged reflection. Thomas had always found this either wise or ominous, depending on the year. He turned off the engine. The cold came in immediately. That particular Ohio October cold that has no mercy in it, that comes off the fields and down from the lake and settles into your bones before you have time to button your coat. Thomas buttoned his coat. He sat for one more moment with his hand on the door handle, and in that moment he was, briefly and without warning, 14 years old again, standing at the edge of the river ice, watching Jesse Morrow skate backward in a wide, careless arc, with his arms out and his head thrown back and his laughter coming out in white clouds that dissolved in the winter air. He got out of the car. Mo. The bar was half full on a Friday evening, which was about what you expected in October. The farmers were in from the harvest, broad-shouldered men in Carhartt who drank slowly and spoke in the low, declarative tones of people who spent their days with machinery. There was a group of younger people, early 20s probably, crowded around the jukebox at the far end arguing about a song selection with the cheerful intensity of a minor civic dispute. Two women at a corner table were sharing a pitcher and a plate of potato skins and laughing about something that had clearly been funny for years. Thomas stood in the doorway for a moment. The bar was long and well lit, which was unusual for a place of this type. Dale Haggerty had always kept good light behind the bar, bright enough to see by, because he said the only thing he couldn't stand was a bartender who knocked things over. The bar stools were the same ones Thomas remembered. Heavy wooden things with red vinyl seats, half of them repaired with electrical tape over the years. The mirror behind the bar was original, slightly foxed at the corners, flanked by two shelves of bottles arranged with the casual order of a place that had been doing this long enough to have opinions. And there, at the far end of the bar with his back to the door, wiping down the oak with a white cloth in slow, methodical circles, was Jesse Morrow. Thomas knew it was him before he saw his face. He knew it by the way he stood, the particular set of his shoulders, the slight lean to the left, the unhurried quality of his movements that had always made him seem, even as a boy, as though he had already arrived wherever he was going. Jesse Morrow had never been in a hurry. It was one of the things that had driven Thomas quietly insane for 30 years. He walked to the bar. He chose a stool in the middle, not too close to where Jesse stood, not so far as to be at the opposite end with intent. He sat down. He set his hands flat on the bar. Jesse turned. There was a moment, 3 seconds, perhaps 4, in which neither of them spoke. Jesse's face registered something that moved through surprise and into something Thomas could not name before settling into a stillness that was either controlled or accidental. He looked older. Of course he looked older. They both did. His hair was still dark, though there was gray at the temples now, which Thomas found, despite everything, despite the 15 years, despite the silence and the distance and the specific, surgical wound of everything that had gone unsaid, almost unbearably handsome. His face had settled. Boys' faces settle in their 30s into the faces they will wear for the rest of their lives, and Jesse's had settled well. The jawline stronger, the eyes more careful, the expression of a man who has been through some things and come out the other side with something intact. Tom, Jesse said, one word. Just his name. The name Jesse had always used, Tom, not Thomas, never Thomas, as though the extra syllable was an unnecessary formality between them. Jesse, Thomas said, a silence. What can I get you? Jesse said. Not a question, a professional statement, a thing to say. Whatever's on draft. Jesse turned to the taps. Thomas watched his hands. He had always had good hands, careful, deliberate, the hands of a person who did things properly the first time. He watched those hands fill a pint glass with the same unhurried precision that had characterized every movement he had ever made, and the beer was set on the bar in front of Thomas with a coaster underneath it, and Jesse met his eyes, and there it was again, that unnamed thing. And then Jesse moved to the other end of the bar to attend to someone else. Thomas took a long drink of his beer. He looked up at the mirror. In the mirror, he could see the whole bar. He could see the farmers and the young people at the jukebox and the two women laughing over their pitcher. He could see the broken neon sign through the small high windows, the Haggerty's Owen orange against the October dark. He could see Jesse, at the far end, talking to a man in a John Deere cap. And he could see the exact moment Jesse glanced at the mirror and found Thomas's eyes in it. Neither of them looked away. Thomas set down his glass. Outside, the October wind moved through the dying cornfields and down Miller Road and pressed itself against the small high windows of the bar. And somewhere in the distance, a train was moving through Millhaven without stopping. The way trains always had. The way everything always had, until now. He ordered another beer. He was not leaving. Act 2. Everything we almost said. Jesse Morrow had a system. When the bar was yours, when you were the one behind the oak, the one with the bottles and the cloth and the deliberate geography of keeping something solid between yourself and the world, you had the power of attention. You could give it, and you could withhold it. You could be everywhere at once, cracking open bottles and taking cash and saying the right word to the right person at the right moment. And in this way, you could manage the entire room without anyone realizing they were being managed. He had learned this in Seattle, where he had tended bar for 6 years at a place on Capitol Hill that seated 90 and was never less than 3/4 full on a weeknight. He had learned to read a room the way some men read water, by feel, by pressure, by the subtle changes in atmosphere that preceded something. Trouble coming had a particular quality of silence. So did joy. So did grief. So did Thomas Calloway sitting at the middle of his bar nursing a draft beer and looking at him in the mirror with 15 years of something behind his eyes. Jesse had known this was coming, or had known it was possible. His grandmother's house was 3 blocks from the Calloway place on Sycamore, and Millhaven was the kind of town where information moved the way weather moved, gradually, and then all at once. His mother, who still lived in Columbus and called on Sundays, had mentioned Richard Calloway's retirement party 3 weeks ago with the precise casualness of a woman who was not being casual. Jesse had understood. He had not known what he would do with the information. Now here was Thomas, and now here was the problem of Thomas, and Jesse was managing the room. He made his way back to the middle of the bar eventually. That was the work. You had to move down the whole length of it, attending to things, and eventually you arrived at the middle and there was no legitimate reason not to stop. "How's your father?" Jesse asked. "Professional, neighborly. Good. He retired today, actually. That's why I'm back." "I heard that. Good for him." "He seems relieved." 30 years at the Water Authority, Jesse said. "I'd be relieved too." Thomas smiled at that. It was the first real thing, the first uncalculated thing. And it crossed his face the same way it always had, the smile starting in his eyes before it reached his mouth. And Jesse picked up the white cloth and found something to wipe down because he needed something to do with his hands. "How long are you in town?" Jesse asked. "Drive back tomorrow morning." Thomas paused. "You?" Jesse considered the question. 3 months was the honest answer. And the honest answer also implied he had stayed longer than he meant to. And that was a conversation with more layers than this moment could hold. "Indefinitely," he said instead, which was technically true. "Helping Dale out, taking it day by day." "That's very unlike you." Jesse looked up from the cloth. "What does that mean?" "You always had a plan," Thomas said. He said it lightly, easily, in the tone of someone referencing a well-known and affectionate fact. "Even at 10 years old, you always knew what came next." "I had plans," Jesse said. "They didn't all work out the way I thought." A pause. "The word they doing the work that we was not yet ready to do." "No," Thomas said. "No, I guess they don't always." The bar filled up around 9. This was the second wave. The people who had eaten dinner at home and then felt the particular pull of a Friday, the need for noise and company and the specific comfort of a room where nobody expected you to be anything other than present. Jesse moved through this wave with the fluency of long practice, and the hours had a rhythm to them that was almost musical in its regularity. And he did not have to look at Thomas to know where he was. He was there. He stayed. This was its own kind of statement, though neither of them was yet speaking directly in the language of statements. Around 10 o'clock, a man named Gerald Pfeiffer took the stool next to Thomas. Gerald was 59, a recently divorced grain farmer with the particular sorrowfulness of a man who had made the right decision and was still surprised by how much it hurt. He and Thomas had apparently known each other peripherally in high school. Gerald was 4 years older, one of the boys who had seemed ancient and authoritative at 17, and now simply seemed like a man who needed somewhere to put his Friday evening. They fell into easy conversation. Thomas laughed at something Gerald said, a real laugh, unguarded, and Jesse was at the far end of the bar refilling someone's whiskey, and he heard the laugh and felt it in his chest like a hand pressed flat against his sternum. He had heard that laugh for 7 years of his childhood and the better part of his adolescence, and then not heard it for 15 years, and the idea that it could still do this to him, that it could still locate something in him that he had spent considerable effort moving furniture in front of, was inconvenient to say the least. He went to the back and restocked for a while. When he came out, Gerald Pfeiffer had moved on, and Thomas was alone at the bar again with a third beer he had not started yet. And he was looking at the door with an expression Jesse recognized but could not immediately name. He walked down to him. Thomas looked up. "You know," Jesse said, quietly, out of the range of the bar's general noise, "you don't have to stay." It was not unkind. It was the opposite of unkind. It was the gentlest possible way of saying, I see you. I see that this is hard. You are allowed to leave. Thomas looked at him for a long moment. I know, he said. He did not leave. Jesse leaned on the bar. A small shift in posture, a small relinquishment of the careful professional distance. How long has it been? 15 years. 15 years, Jesse repeated, as though testing the weight of it. Since the summer before I went to Columbus for grad school, Thomas said. You were leaving for Seattle. We had that. He stopped. Something moved across his face. We said goodbye in your driveway. I remember. You said you'd write. I said I'd try, Jesse said. There's a difference. Thomas picked up his beer. I know there is. He took a drink, set it down. I wrote anyway. Jesse looked at the bar, at his own hands. I know, I got them. The silence that followed this admission was not empty. It was the fullest silence Jesse had ever been in. A silence with the weight of letters in it. Actual paper letters, 3 of them. The kind of letters a 22-year-old wrote by hand in the particular desperation of someone who did not yet know how to say what he meant and tried to say it anyway. He had kept them. He had not written back. He had kept them in an olive green tin in the back of his closet in every apartment he had ever lived in, and the not writing back had sat in his chest for 15 years like a splinter too deep to reach. And he had long since stopped examining whether this made him a coward or simply a man trying not to drown. Jesse, Thomas began. And then the jukebox, which had been playing something low and country and unobtrusive, suddenly lurched into a different song. Something louder, something with a beat. And a group of younger people let out a cheer and pushed back their chairs to dance, and the moment broke like a glass dropped on a tile floor. Gone, Jesse straightened up. Last call's at midnight, he said, because it was the only true and neutral thing left to say. Thomas looked at him with an expression that Jesse would spend the rest of the evening carrying in his chest, heavy and warm and entirely without resolution. Okay, Thomas said. He stayed until midnight. He did not bring it up again. He left with a nod and a good night and the sound of the door swinging shut behind him, and Jesse stood at the end of the bar and listened to the sound of tires on gravel and the October wind and the jukebox playing a song nobody was dancing to anymore. He thought. He leaves for Columbus in the morning. He thought, I have his address. I've had it for 15 years. He thought, good night was not the same as goodbye, and he was not, at 37, entirely sure he knew the difference. Act 3. The night it all came true, in the wrong direction. He almost didn't come back. That is the truest thing about Saturday morning. About the gray Ohio light coming through the curtains of his childhood bedroom in the house his grandmother had left him on Elm Street. About the coffee going cold beside the bed while he lay staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since 1994 and probably would be there in 2094, and which had the approximate shape of the state of Florida if you tilted your head just right. He almost got in the car and drove to Columbus. He had everything packed. He had said goodbye to his parents the night before, after Haggerty's, over a plate of his mother's pot roast that he had eaten without tasting while his father talked about fishing, and his mother watched him with the particular gentle attention of a woman who had been watching her son carry something heavy for a very long time. He had everything he needed to leave. What he did not have, and what he could not manufacture with all the reasonable self-talk in the world, was the certainty that leaving was right. Not just pragmatic, not just safe. Right. Jesse Morrow had kept his letters. Thomas sat up in bed and put his feet on the cold floor. Jesse Morrow had kept 3 handwritten letters, written over the course of the worst year of Thomas's life. The year he had arrived in Columbus at graduate school knowing absolutely no one, in a city that felt enormous and indifferent, with the specific kind of loneliness that comes from leaving behind the one person who made you feel understood and not being able to name that feeling to anyone, including yourself. And Jesse had kept them and said nothing for 15 years, and last night had said, I know. I got them with the particular stillness of a person confessing something they had decided to confess. That was not nothing. Thomas got dressed. He got in the car. He drove to Haggerty's. The bar was closed on Saturday mornings. The parking lot was empty except for a 10-year-old pickup truck with a dented rear quarter panel that Thomas recognized, after a moment, as belonging to Ellie Morrow, Jesse's grandmother's truck, which meant Jesse had kept it, which meant Jesse was here. The front door was locked. Thomas knocked. Nothing. He went around the side of the building. past the broken neon sign, past the drainage pipe he had once climbed in the long-ago summer of being young and reckless and full of feeling he didn't have language for. There was a side door, a service entrance, propped open with a milk crate. The smell of stale beer and cleaning solution and old wood came out into the cool morning air. Thomas pushed open the door and went in. Jesse was at the bar, not tending it, sitting at it, on the customer's side, on one of the red vinyl stools with a mug of coffee and a legal pad in front of him that he appeared to be writing on. He was in a gray flannel shirt and he had not shaved. He looked in this moment almost exactly like the boy Thomas had known. The same quality of stillness, the same quality of being entirely inside whatever he was doing. He looked up when he heard the door. "You were supposed to leave this morning," he said. "I know." Jesse looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the legal pad. Then he looked back up. "There's coffee," he said. "Pot's in the back." Thomas got coffee. He came back and sat down at the bar, one stool away from Jesse. The legal pad was face down now. The morning light came through the small high windows at a low angle and lay in long rectangles on the floor. "What were you writing?" Thomas asked. "Nothing." "Jesse?" "A letter," Jesse said. He said it flatly. The way you say a thing when you have decided to say it but have not yet decided what happens after. "I've been writing it since I got back to town 3 months ago. I haven't gotten very far." The air in the bar was very still. "Who's it to?" Thomas asked, though he already knew. Jesse picked up his coffee mug. Set it down. "You're an idiot," he said, but it was not an insult. It was something between exasperation and wonder. "You know that? You've mentioned it. You drove 4 hours from Columbus on a Friday night because your parents told you I was in town." Thomas started to object, but Jesse continued. Don't. I know you. I have always known you. You drove 4 hours and you sat at my bar and you stayed until midnight and you left and came back this morning, and you're going to make me be the one who says it." Thomas looked at him. "I'm not going to do that," Jesse said. "I have done that my entire life. I have been the one who manages everything and says nothing and takes care of things and waits and waits and waits, and I am 37 years old and I am tired of being the one who waits." "Then don't wait," Thomas said. His voice was steady. He was surprised by how steady it was. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because the last time—" Jesse stopped, stood up, walked behind the bar. This was his tell. The bar between them was the armor. The oak was the management. Thomas had watched him do this twice last night without understanding it. He understood it now. "The last time I let myself feel this, I left. I went to Seattle. I spent 6 years in Seattle and I was fine there. I was completely fine. I met people and I had a life and I was fine. That's not the same as happy." "No," Jesse said. "It's not." "Then tell me what happened," Thomas said. "Tell me what happened 15 years ago. Why didn't you write back?" Jesse looked at him across the bar. The morning light lay between them. "Because I was scared," Jesse said. "Is that what you want?" "Because it was easier to be 3,000 miles away in a city where no one knew me, and I could be whoever I needed to be. And your letters were—" He stopped again. His jaw was tight. "Your letters were the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me, and I didn't know what to do with that. I was 22, and I didn't know what to do with something that real." Thomas set down his coffee mug. "I wasn't any braver," he said. "I want you to know that. I sent those letters and then I sat by the phone for a month. An actual phone, a landline, because that's how old we are. And when you didn't call, I told myself I had been wrong about everything. About what I felt, about what I thought you felt. I spent the next decade telling myself I had imagined the whole thing. You didn't imagine it. I know that now. You knew it then. I was scared too." They looked at each other. In the silence, something shifted. Something cracked, slightly, like ice in early spring, the sound before the opening. Thomas felt it. He was certain Jesse felt it. And then Jesse said quietly, "You're going back to Columbus." One sentence, stated as a fact. And underneath the fact, a question so large it displaced all the air in the room. "I live there," Thomas said. "I know you do. I have a job there. My whole life is there." "I know." "What are you asking me, Jesse?" Jesse looked at the bar, at his hands on the bar. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "I don't have the right to ask you anything. I'm the one who didn't write back. I'm the one who let 15 years go. We both did. I started it. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, you said you were writing a letter. Jesse said nothing. You've been here 3 months, Thomas said. You've had my address since before I gave it to you, because I know you have it. Your mother and my mother play cards every other Wednesday, and they have for 30 years, and you know it. You've been here 3 months, writing a letter. Don't, Jesse said. Don't what? Don't make it sound simple. Don't make it sound like I was stalling. I was trying to find the right... He stopped. He pressed both hands flat on the bar. There is no right way to say some things. Then say it wrong, Thomas said. God, Jesse, say it wrong. I have been waiting to hear you say it wrong for 15 years. Jesse looked up at him. His eyes were dark and careful, and there was something in them that Thomas had last seen on the ice of the Millhaven River when they were 14 years old. A particular expression that had lasted exactly 1 moment before Jesse had skated away into the winter, and the two of them had never spoken about it, ever, not once. Not in 3 more years of friendship before everything changed. He was going to say it. Thomas could see it. Jesse Morrow, the man who managed everything, the man who waited, the man who kept letters in an olive green tin for 15 years. He was about to put down the weight, and then Jesse's phone rang. It was on the bar beside the legal pad, and it rang with the specific, indifferent brutality of the world, and Jesse looked at it, and the screen said, Dad, and the moment went the way all almost moments go. Sideways, out the door, into the October air, gone. Jesse picked up the phone. I have to... Take it, Thomas said. Jesse answered, turned away. The conversation was short. His father, something about the house, something about paperwork, Jesse saying yes and I'll call you back and yes and I know, Dad. He hung up, turned back. The bar was just a bar again. Morning light on the floor, empty stools. I should let you go, Jesse said. And Thomas, who was not brave enough, not yet, not quite, who had come close and touched the edge of it and felt the thing that had been real since he was a child and had not yet found the final word for it. Thomas said, yeah, okay. He picked up his jacket. He walked to the service entrance. He stopped. He stood in the doorway with his back to the bar, his hand on the frame, and the October air coming in around him, and he said, I'll be at my parents' for dinner tonight, on Sycamore. If you wanted to, I don't know, stop by. He didn't look back. He walked out into the morning. Behind him, Jesse Morrow stood at the bar in the empty room and looked at the legal pad on the stool, and at the coffee mug that Thomas had left, and at the door that swung shut, and at the morning light on the floor. He picked up the legal pad. He turned it over. He looked at what he had written. Dear Tom, there is something I should have said in the driveway 15 years ago. I don't know how to begin except to begin. He picked up his pen. Act 4. The porch on Sycamore Street. There is a particular quality to dinner at your parents' house when you are an adult. It is not the dinner of childhood, which had urgency and noise and the complicated texture of family dynamics playing out in real time. With someone asking to be excused and someone else pushing food around a plate, and your mother saying eat with the weight of the entire maternal tradition behind the word. The adult dinner is quieter, more deliberate. It has been set, the table, the meal, the occasion, with the consciousness that these evenings are not infinite, that the people sitting across from you are aging, that the house itself is a kind of living memory that will not exist in this form forever. Thomas had been aware of all of this at dinner with his parents, and he had tried to be fully present to it, to his father's stories about the water authority, to his mother's questions about Columbus, to the pot roast and the green beans and the dinner rolls from the bakery on Commerce Street that had been there since he was a child, and somehow still made the same dinner rolls to the same specifications, as though certain things were protected from the passage of time by virtue of being essential. He had been aware of all of it. He had also been aware, for the entirety of dinner, of the front door. His mother had made apple pie. His father had talked about the fishing on Millhaven Reservoir. Thomas had helped with the dishes. They had moved to the living room, where his father had put on the baseball highlights. The season was over, the World Series had been played, but his father watched baseball highlights the way some men prayed. And his mother had picked up her knitting, and Thomas had sat in the armchair by the window that looked out at Sycamore Street, and he had watched the headlights of cars pass in the dark. At 7:40, his mother said, without looking up from her knitting, Jesse Morrow is such a lovely man, always was. His father continued watching baseball. Thomas looked at the window. At 8:15, a set of headlights turned onto Sycamore Street from Miller Road, and slowed in front of the house and did not pass. Thomas put down his coffee. "I'm going to get some air," he said. His father said, "Mm-hmm." His mother kept knitting. Jesse was parked at the curb. He had gotten out of the truck and was standing beside it with his hands in his jacket pockets in the posture of a man who has arrived at a place and is now renegotiating the decision to arrive. He was wearing a dark jacket Thomas had not seen before, and he had shaved. The street was quiet. Sycamore had always been a quiet street. Old maples along the sidewalk that were losing the last of their leaves, the sound of the town carrying faintly from the direction of Miller Road. "You came," Thomas said from the porch steps. "I said I might." "You said nothing. I'm the one who said something." Jesse looked at him. "You going to stand on the porch all night?" Thomas came down the steps. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the house he had grown up in. On the street they had both ridden bikes on and walked to school on and navigated in every season for the first 18 years of their lives. And the October night was cold and clear, and the stars were out over Millhaven, the way they were always out when you came back. Brighter, somehow, than they were anywhere else, as though the town had fewer things competing for the sky. "I want to walk," Jesse said. They walked. There is a route through Millhaven that Thomas's body knew without being asked. It was the route of childhood, the route worn into his muscle memory by 10,000 repetitions. Down Sycamore to Oak, left on Oak toward the school, past the Methodist church where both their mothers still attended Sunday service, past the old hardware store that was now a yoga studio, which neither of them had been able to process when they first saw it. Down past the park with the pavilion and the drinking fountain that had been broken since 1997. Toward the river. They walked the route without discussing it. That was the strange, specific comfort of knowing someone for 30 years. The navigation of shared geography without the need for direction. "I finished the letter," Jesse said. They were on Oak Street, passing the school, the windows dark. Thomas kept walking. "What did it say?" "It said what I should have said 15 years ago." "Which is?" Jesse stopped walking. Thomas stopped and turned. They were in front of the Methodist church, under one of the old elms, the streetlight filtering through the last of the leaves and laying a shifting pattern on the sidewalk between them. Jesse was looking at him with the full attention of a man who has spent a long time in preparation and has arrived at the moment the preparation was for. "I have been in love with you," Jesse said, "since we were 14 years old and I watched you fall off that drainage pipe outside Haggerty's." Thomas felt something move through him. Not surprise because it was not a surprise. It was, in fact, the most recognized thing he had ever heard. The thing he had known for 23 years and had heard in different forms in his own head for 23 years, and hearing it in Jesse's voice was the difference between reading about a place and standing in it. "That was when I broke the sign," Thomas said. His voice was even, almost even. "I know. You laughed for 10 minutes. You could have broken your neck." "I did not fall because I was being careless," Thomas said. "I fell because I was looking at you." Jesse looked at him. "I was trying to impress you," Thomas continued. "I was always trying to impress you. For 7 years I was trying to impress you, and I didn't know why until that summer, and then I knew exactly why, and I didn't know what to do with it." He stopped. "And then you went to Seattle, and I went to Columbus, and I spent 15 years telling myself it had been, I don't know, young. A phase. Something that belonged to Millhaven and couldn't travel. And now? It traveled," Thomas said. "It's been everywhere I've been for 30 years. Something crossed Jesse's face. Relief and grief at the same time. The particular expression of someone who has been waiting to be told something true and receives it and discovers that the truth contains both the comfort they hoped for and the weight of everything it has cost. "I didn't write back," Jesse said. "I've been carrying that for 15 years. I need you to know that I know what that cost." "I know you know. It wasn't. I wasn't indifferent. That's what I need you to understand. It was the opposite. I didn't write back because I didn't trust myself. Because if I wrote back, it was real. And if it was real..." "What?" Jesse looked at the streetlight through the leaves. "My father had opinions," he said. "About a lot of things, about me. I was 22, I wasn't brave enough." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Are you brave enough now?" he asked. The elm tree shifted in the October wind. Leaves came down. Jesse looked at him. "I'm standing here," he said. "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." He took a step forward. One step, closing half the distance between them. "Tom, I drove back to Millhaven to settle my grandmother's estate. I had a life in Seattle. I had a whole life there. I was going to sell the house, go back, maybe go somewhere new. I had a plan. He paused. And then I got here and I remembered what this place felt like, and I kept finding reasons to stay. And I didn't let myself examine why until 3 months in, when your mother mentioned the retirement party and I sat in my grandmother's kitchen and thought, oh, that's why. Thomas could hear his own pulse. You stayed because of me, he said. Not a question. I stayed because I hadn't finished something, Jesse said. I stayed because I owe you, because I owe us, the thing I didn't do at 22. Which is? Jesse was close now. The October air between them was barely enough to qualify as distance. Tell you the truth, Jesse said. Just tell you the truth, simply, without managing it. So tell me, Thomas said. Jesse looked at him. His eyes were very dark in the streetlight. I love you, he said. I have loved you since we were teenagers standing on the ice. I loved you when I read your letters and didn't answer. I loved you when I was in Seattle being fine, Tom, being perfectly fine, making a whole life out of fine, and none of it felt like this. He gestured between them with one hand, a helpless gesture, the gesture of a man who has reached the end of language and is pointing at what's left. None of it felt like standing on this sidewalk in this town that we've known our whole lives, talking to the one person who has always... He stopped. Thomas was looking at him with an expression Jesse had seen only once before. On the ice of the Millhaven River, a moment before Thomas had skated away, a moment full of something that had gone unnamed for 23 years. It was not unnamed now. Jesse, Thomas said. His voice had changed. Something in it had changed. Say it, Jesse said quietly. Whatever you're about to say, say it. Thomas looked at him, and the October leaves came down, and the streetlight shifted through the elm, and all of Millhaven was quiet around them, and Thomas opened his mouth. And the back door of the Methodist church banged open, and 3 women came out, carrying a folding table, talking loudly about the fall harvest supper. And the moment stretched and bent and accommodated the sudden noise the way moments do, not breaking, but becoming something different. Charged, deferred, vibrating with everything it still contained. Jesse stepped back. Thomas looked at the women with the folding table, and then at Jesse, and then at the sidewalk, and then back at Jesse. Walk me to the river, Thomas said. Jesse nodded. They walked. The river was low in October. It always was. The summer took something from it, drew it down until the stones showed along the banks, and the current slowed to a deliberate pace, and it did not come back to itself until the spring rains and the snowmelt gave it what it needed. Thomas and Jesse stood on the bank below the water tower, where they had skated every winter of their boyhood, and the water moved over the stones in the dark, and the stars were very clear above Millhaven, and neither of them spoke for a long time. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who have said almost everything and are resting before the final word. I have a good life in Columbus, Thomas said eventually. He was looking at the water. I want to be honest about that. I'm not a man who's been miserable for 15 years waiting to come back to a small town in Ohio. I have friends there, work I care about, a life I built. I know, Jesse said. I'm not asking you to give that up. I'm not saying you are. Then what are you saying? Thomas looked at him. The river moved between the stones. I'm saying that a good life isn't the same as the right life, he said. And I've known the difference since I was 22 years old writing letters by hand to someone 3,000 miles away. He paused. The question isn't whether I have something to go back to. The question is whether what I'm going back to is the thing I actually want. Is it? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Not if there's an alternative, he said. Jesse looked at the river, at the stones, at the water moving over the stones in the October dark. I haven't decided to stay in Millhaven forever, he said. I want to be clear about that too. I'm not asking you to come back here and take up where we left off like nothing happened. I'm 37. You're 37. We're not starting at the beginning. No, Thomas said. We're starting at 37 with 30 years of history and 15 years of silence and whatever comes next. He paused. That's not nothing. That might be better than the beginning. The wind moved through the dry grass along the bank. Tomorrow morning, Jesse said. Yes. You're going back tomorrow morning. I told my parents I was. My job starts Monday. Okay, Thomas said. He turned to look at Jesse fully, in the dark, by the river, in the town where both of them had grown up and grown away from and returned to for different reasons, or maybe now that he was standing here, for the same reason. Jesse, I need to ask you something. Ask me. If I go back tomorrow, if I drive back to Columbus and go to work on Monday and come back to Millhaven for Christmas because that's what I do every year, Christmas at my parents', will you still be here? Jesse looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. Is that a plan? Thomas said. Or is that just a thing you're saying because we're standing next to the river and it's October and everything feels true? Jesse almost smiled. Both, he said. It can be both. Thomas looked at him. Then I need you to know, he said, and his voice was the voice of someone who has arrived at the last few words before the thing, the sentence before the sentence, the breath before the breath, that when I come back at Christmas, I am not coming back for my parents. Jesse looked at him. The river ran over the stones. The stars held above Millhaven. Thomas looked at Jesse Morrow, this man he had known since childhood, this man who kept letters in a tin, this man who had stayed. And he opened his mouth and Act 5. What 30 years sounds like, finally said. There are things that take a lifetime to say, not because the words are complicated. They never are, for the things that matter most. Not because the moment is hard to find. The moments present themselves with a regular and patient generosity if you are willing to see them. Not because you do not know what you feel. You have always known, in the place in your chest where you keep the truest things, the ones that have never changed. Things take a lifetime to say because you are afraid. Because you were 14 and the world was newly large and you didn't yet have a name for what you felt on the ice when he laughed with his head thrown back. Because you were 22 and everything was possible. And everything was terrifying in equal measure and the letter went unanswered and you understood, or thought you understood, what that meant. Because the years have a gravity that is not malicious but is persistent. And you tell yourself the story of a thing often enough that the story becomes the container and you forget there is something living inside it. Thomas Calloway was 37 years old and standing next to the Millhaven River, and he had run out of years. Jesse, he said. The same word he had said in the bar, in the morning, at the beginning of the night. But different now. The way the same note sounds different depending on what comes before and after it, depending on the key you're playing in. Tom, Jesse said. I love you, Thomas said. 3 words. The 3 words. The only words. The words that had been waiting in the back of his chest since the ice on the Millhaven River when they were 14 years old. Behind every letter and every silence and every reasonable Columbus year and every Christmas visit and every fine and every I'm fine and every managed and careful and protected distance of the last 30 years. He said them. They were out. They were in the October air, real. Jesse looked at him. Thomas had expected. He did not know what he had expected. Relief, perhaps, of a straightforward kind, or tears, or laughter, or the neat resolution of a long-postponed thing. What he did not expect and what he received was the expression on Jesse Morrow's face, the particular, specific expression of a man who has been cold for a very long time and has just stepped into the warmth and is not yet laughing, not yet crying, just standing very still in the warmth and letting it move through him. Jesse reached out and took Thomas's hand, not dramatically, not with the urgency of a declaration or the sweep of a gesture designed to be remembered. He simply reached out and took Thomas's hand, the way you take the hand of someone you know, the way you reach for something that belongs to you, the quiet claiming of a thing that has always been yours but has been sitting across a room for too long. Thomas held on. They stood there, next to the Millhaven River, in the cold of October, with the stars above them and the water below them and the town around them, and they held on. I know, Jesse said. I've known since you were 14 years old and you fell off that drainage pipe looking at me. His voice was quiet, not performed, just true. I've known every year of the 15 years since. I've known for the 3 months I've been back in this town, writing a letter I couldn't finish because every time I wrote it I could hear your voice reading it. And I didn't know what you would say, and I was scared. He looked at their hands. I am not scared anymore. Neither am I, Thomas said. Just like that? It took 30 years, Thomas said. That's not just like that. Jesse looked at him, and the almost smile completed itself. A full smile, the first real one of the evening, the one that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth, which had always been the most disarming thing about Jesse Morrow, and had not changed in 30 years. Thomas had spent 30 years feeling the effect of that smile across varying distances. He was now feeling it from approximately 18 inches, and the proximity was significant. "What happens now?" Jesse asked. "I drive back to Columbus in the morning," Thomas said. "And?" "And I come back at Christmas." He paused. "And we figure out what comes after that." "That's not a plan." "No," Thomas said. "It's a beginning." He looked at Jesse. "I'm good with beginnings. I'm better at them than you are. You're better at continuations." Jesse laughed. A real laugh, low and surprised. "You've been thinking about our relative strengths? I've had 30 years. Fair." Jesse's thumb moved across Thomas's knuckles. A small, deliberate movement, like a question asked very quietly. "I'll be here at Christmas." "I know you will. I'll be here after Christmas, too." "I'm counting on it." The wind came off the river and moved through their jackets, and Jesse stepped closer, the way you step closer to a fire, naturally, without discussion, because the warmth is there, and you have been cold long enough. Thomas did not step back. They were quiet for a while. Not the charged silence of the almost. A different silence. The silence on the other side of the thing. The silence of two people who have said the true thing and are now simply standing in it, letting it become ordinary in the good way. The way all true things become ordinary when they are given space. "Tell me something I don't know," Jesse said. His voice was close. "About what?" "About the last 15 years, something real." Thomas thought about it. "The river ran. I kept a plant alive for 3 years once," he said. "A philodendron. I was unreasonably proud of it." "What happened to it?" "I went to a conference in Atlanta for a week and forgot to ask anyone to water it." Jesse made a sound that was halfway between sympathy and laughter. "I have pictures of it," Thomas said. "Before. I kept pictures." "Of course you did." "Your turn." Jesse was quiet for a moment. "I learned to bake bread during the pandemic," he said. "Sourdough, like everyone else. Mine was actually pretty good." He paused. "I kept a starter alive for 2 years. Named it." "You named your sourdough starter." "Don't." "What did you name it?" A pause. "Tom." Thomas looked at him. "It kept coming back," Jesse said simply. "No matter how much I thought I'd let it die, it kept coming back." He said it without particular drama. The way you state a thing that is both a joke and not a joke. The way the truest things are often said, sideways with a slight deflection, and then directly in the space after the laughter settles. Thomas looked at the river. "Jesse," he said. "Yeah." "I'm really glad the sign is still broken." Jesse looked at him. The question in his expression. "The sign at Haggerty's," Thomas said. "The one I broke." "I drove back into town last night and the first thing I looked for was whether it was still broken. And it was. And it felt like, I don't know. It felt like proof that something had been waiting." Jesse looked at the stars. "Dale keeps saying he's going to fix it," he said. "Every few months he says it. I keep not reminding him." Thomas turned to look at him. "You've been leaving it broken," he said. Jesse met his eyes. "The night you broke it," he said, "was the night I knew. Watching you fall off that pipe like an idiot, and feeling—" He stopped. "I went home that night and I lay in bed and I thought I would have climbed 100 pipes for him. That was the exact thought. Word for word. I was 14 years old." He shook his head, not with regret, but with the tender exasperation of a man who has been carrying a beautiful thing for too long in uncomfortable conditions. "Every time Dale talks about fixing the sign, I think about that night, and I think, not yet. Not until it's been said." Thomas looked at him. "It's been said," he said. Jesse smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "It has." They walked back to Sycamore Street the long way, through the park, past the pavilion, through the quiet October town that had shaped both of them and released both of them and received both of them back. The town that was not remarkable in any way except that it was theirs, that it held the geography of everything they had been before they knew what they were. At the gate of his parents' house, Thomas stopped. Jesse stopped beside him. The porch light was on. Through the living room window, Thomas could see the television's blue light. His father, still with the baseball. His mother's silhouette, knitting. The familiar architecture of the life that had made him, quiet and present and entirely itself. "I'll call you," Thomas said. "This week, from Columbus." "Okay," Jesse said. "And at Christmas—" "I'll be here," Jesse said. I told you. Thomas looked at him. At Jesse Morrow, the man who had been his best friend for 7 years and his silence for 15, and who was standing under the elm tree in front of his parents' house on Sycamore Street, in the town they had both grown up in, with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face open in a way Thomas had not seen it in 30 years, the way it had been open on the ice of the Millhaven River before caution came for them both. Jesse, Thomas said. Tom, thank you for staying. Jesse looked at him. Directly, fully, the way he had looked at him from behind the bar last night, in the mirror. Except now there was no mirror, and no bar, and no distance manufactured or accidental between them. He looked at Thomas the way you look at something you've been carrying for a long time once you finally set it down, when you can see what it actually is. Thank you for coming back, he said. Thomas put his hand on the gate. He did not open it yet. One more thing, he said. Yeah? The letter. The one you were writing this morning. Jesse waited. Finish it, Thomas said. Even though it's been said now, in person. Finish it and send it. He paused. I want to have it. Jesse looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Thomas opened the gate, walked up the path, climbed the porch steps. At the door, he turned. Jesse was still at the gate, watching. His breath came out in small white clouds in the October cold, rising and dissolving in the dark above the elm tree above Sycamore Street, above Millhaven, Ohio, which was not a remarkable town, but which was theirs. They looked at each other across the small distance of a yard and a path in 30 years. Then Thomas went inside. The letter arrived on a Thursday 11 days later. It was handwritten on 4 pages of yellow legal paper in Jesse Morrow's careful, unhurried hand, the same hand that had filled a pint glass and wiped down a bar and reached across the dark by the river to take what was his. Thomas read it at the kitchen table in his Columbus apartment, with the philodendron's replacement growing in a pot on the windowsill. A new one, 3 months old, recently and carefully named. And the morning light coming in from the east, and the whole reasonable good life of Columbus arranged around him. And he read all 4 pages, slowly, the way you read something that has been a long time coming. The last paragraph was short. He read it twice. He set the letter on the table and looked at it. Outside, Columbus went about its ordinary business of a Thursday morning, indifferent and vast and entirely unaware that in one kitchen in one apartment, a man was sitting at a table with the weight of 30 years lifted off his chest so completely that he could, for the first time in a very long time, feel the exact dimensions of what had been there all along. What had been there all along was not grief exactly, though it had worn grief's coat. It was not longing, though it had used longing's language. It was not regret, though regret had been its constant companion. What had been there all along was love, which is the most portable and most persistent thing, which travels with you to Columbus and to Seattle and back to Millhaven and down to the river and across 30 years without diminishing, which had always been true, which is still true now, which, as Jesse Morrow's final paragraph said, in his careful, unhurried hand, had never actually been waiting for the right moment. It had simply been waiting for them to be brave enough to let it be real. Thomas picked up his phone. He dialed. It rang once. Tom, Jesse said, and Thomas looked out the window at the Columbus morning and said the only true and simple thing. I got your letter. A pause. Yeah? Jesse's voice, 300 miles away in Millhaven, on Elm Street, in his grandmother's house that he had not yet sold, next to a broken neon sign that nobody had fixed. Yeah, Thomas said, you can write. He could hear Jesse's smile before he heard the laugh. And the laugh came out in a white cloud somewhere in Ohio and dissolved in the November air. And it was the same laugh it had always been. And it was the best sound Thomas had ever heard. And the distance between Columbus and Millhaven was exactly 278 miles, which was nothing. Which was nothing at all. The sign at Haggerty's Tavern on Miller Road was repaired the following spring. It reads, Haggerty's Open. It is, by general agreement, the finest sign in Millhaven. Or ND. Total word count. Approximately 11,400 words. The distance between us. A story in 5 acts.